Again, welcome to another episode of A Revolution in Education. I'm your humble host, Jim McCue, along with Chris Unger. We are speaking with some amazing leaders in education today. We have Melissa and Keith from 5280 High School. Their purpose is to create students who are thinkers, problem solvers, collaborators, and innovators. It's founded on the principle that success today requires more than just academic factual knowledge. They'll speak more to that purpose, that vision, and that mission. And then we also have High School of the Recording Arts, HSRA, which is dedicated to providing all young people a chance to realize their full potential despite any previous setbacks. As they engage with students through music and exploration, through music entrepreneurship, they demonstrate that core learning areas and real-world 21st century skills can be acquired at the same time. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks.
Wonderful, wonderful. So this will be a round robin sort of conversation. So for listeners that are used to our format, or for new ones here, I'll reiterate for you. We're going to go through some a semblance of past, present, and future about the stories that make up the educators here. It'll be a rather informal conversation that we hope generates inspiration and further collaboration and outreach, if you will. So I suppose the first question that I'll start with is, what brought you to education? What was that formative experience, either through the lens of someone that really touched you or an experience that brought you to the education space today?
I'll start. I initially entered education when I was graduating from college. I went to the University of Colorado at Boulder, and I heard about a group called Teach for America, and didn't really want to jump into my career yet. So I joined Teach for America and taught for a few years and ended up loving it and stayed for about 5 years. It's supposed to be a 2-year commitment, but I ended up staying there for 5 years, but ultimately said, hey, let me get back on my career path that I was planning on. And so I went to medical school in 2008. And in my last year of medical school, never thinking I would go into education again, I came into recovery from addiction myself. And just through a long period, about 18 months of working and thinking about who I was, kind of reinventing myself as a person, the idea for 5280 High School just came into my mind, and I rejected it for about 18 months. But ultimately, the burden of starting a school for kids in recovery to help them get sober, just like I got sober in medical school, just became too great. And I felt like it was my purpose. And so in 2013, I quit medicine and started working to launch 5280. So that was, 7-8 years ago. So here I am back in education, probably here to stay for the rest of my life. So that's my story. Keith, you want to talk about you?
Yeah, I'm also in long-term recovery as well. I met Melissa a couple of years ago, and an opportunity came to be able to be of service to our kids here at 5280 High School, and I couldn't pass the opportunity up. And it's the greatest decision I ever made in my life, and I'm grateful to be here. I love our kids. I love our mission, to be able to talk about recovery and how we can bring our program of recovery to school with us to be successful in the classroom is awesome, and those principles that we talk about. And I'm just very grateful to be able to be of service. And that's what it's all about today.
I love that. Thank you both.
I think listening to Melissa, my story is somewhat similar in that I didn't go to education. I feel like education came to me. I was, like I said earlier, involved in the music business, practicing law, doing some entrepreneurial things. If you would have told me that I would be an educator, I would have laughed at you. It's like the furthest thing from my mind. But then when we were confronted with this community issue of young people not being served properly in school, and I began to reflect on, my own education and my own experiences, it just became too powerful of a need to ignore. So, facing up to that and recognizing that I had something that I could bring to help and support these young people was something that I couldn't turn away from. And it was really interesting to me, as I began to do it, how so many things in my life had really prepared me for that challenge as well as opportunity. And so for me, just thinking about going as far back as my ancestors and thinking about race in this country and issues of racial and social injustice and oppression, and then thinking about my own family and in terms of my parents and what they went through to raise me and the opportunities they gave me despite their challenges, and how those opportunities really gave me all of the knowledge and experiences that I bring to the work that I do every day, is really something that is very clear to me, that it was in preparation for the work that we do.
Tony, thank you so much for sharing that. Joey, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I think I have some components too of my story that's similar to what you three shared. Similar to Melissa, when I got out of college, I didn't do TFA, but I was involved in a lot of activism in college, and I ended up working with Greenpeace for a number of years as a organizer, and opened up a couple of field offices in Arizona and Minnesota, and worked a lot with youth. I worked a lot with youth as community change makers who spoke truth to power to politicians, spoke truth to power to people who were playing the role of activists in their own neighborhood. And it really resonated with me that there was enormous power, sophistication, intelligence, brilliance, and impact in young people. And I loved it. And I thought to myself at that point in my life, there's real change to be made in the community from the vantage point of the school and from the vantage point of working with young people who are fresh and inspired and energetic and brilliant in a lot of ways. And so I decided, instead of sticking in the advocacy field for Greenpeace and working on environmental policy, I wanted to work closer to a community center with people directly to help and work with people to empower themselves to make change in their own backyard and change the world on a national, international level. Got my teacher's license, subbed all over the Twin Cities for a number of years, and eventually got hired at the High School for Recording Arts 10 years ago now. And ever since then have been working with Tony and a bunch of our amazing students and staff to build out our program to really emphasize that role of young people as change makers, as community involved with a broader community, and as creative thought leaders in this space. The ability to really see stuff that a lot of times adults miss or become cynical to, avenues to change, avenues to push people to be more moral and more creative with their thinking. And having been in education for 10 years, my instinct from the beginning was right. The longer I'm in education, the more I realize how important it is to step out of the way and create space for student empowerment and youth voice to take center stage, because that is where real power resides. And that is how that change maker role can translate into future growth and future impact in the community that we serve. So that's kind of my input into education, marrying that activist side of me with the pedagogy and construction of a school. And I was very lucky to find HSRA pretty early on in my career, because there was a confluence of agreement on education philosophy, and it's been great ever since.
We were lucky to find Joey too.
Hey, I wanted to follow up with a question, and let me frame it. I won't go into great details, but I call this as a need for a revolution in education. And it seems to me, there's a lot of people that I know, and I don't know if you guys put yourselves in the same category. Not that I want to categorize you for sure, but there are people who are working on the outskirts, like outside the actual public school ecosystem. I have often said, like, the public school ecosystem is very, it maintains the status quo a great deal. And it's set up to kind of maintain the status quo through the policy and funding structures that we have. If I say high school, everybody sees exactly the same thing: long hallways, rows and rows of rooms with 25 to 30 kids and desks and, you know, the 7-period day and all that stuff. But you guys are not doing that, right? And so you guys are like outside the ecosystem. And so I want to, like, one of the things that I wanted to do with this podcast series, what Jim and I wanted to do, is instead of selling ideas, we wanted to sell is not the right word. We wanted to share the stories of the individuals who have decided that I am going to insert my energy and my personality and my passion to impact and make a difference for youth. And there's a decision point. Can I do that inside the ecosystem, or do I have to do it outside the ecosystem? And I'm just wondering whether each of you could kind of say something about, you know, if somebody, I'm a 9th grade biology teacher, I don't like what I'm seeing, I'm listening to this podcast, well, what can you tell me? What can I actually do? How can I think about this? Where can they go? And I don't know, that's a big question. Like I want people to get inspired by these personal stories, but of course, I don't want them just to be inspired by the personal stories. Do you have any thoughts? Like, what guidance or advice could you give them about maybe either fighting in the system or getting out of the system and doing something differently? That's a lot. Sorry. I don't know who wants to tackle that.
So I think, you know, it's an excellent question, Chris. And I think that this is the type of stuff we deal with every day and have been since we were started in 98, you know, for over 20 years, to rethink what it is to be a school. And our institution has a mission which serves a group of young people that are often abandoned or neglected in the broader ecosystem. I think that's where it starts. We serve young people 14 through 21 who have often experienced academic trauma, institutional racism, have been pushed or kicked out of the traditional system, have had bad experiences in that traditional system that you described, Chris, that I walk into the hallway, I go in my class, I sit there, I'm passive, and then I regurgitate some work and eventually I leave. It doesn't work for a lot of young people from all walks of life. And we see in major metropolitan areas all across the country what we call almost a pejorative way of describing it, a dropout crisis. But we see it as a crisis of kids getting expelled from this traditional framework. So for us, we've thought, well, what do these young people want as an institution that is the quote unquote schoolhouse? What would be useful for young people in the community for us to present as what a school would be? And it's a long conversation, but to give you some bullet points of what we do that works for young people is we put a enormous and heavy emphasis on relationships. And we have restructured the way our organizational staff system is set up, who we hire, different roles we have, decentralized the role of just the administrator, teacher, student. We have a lot of different people in our building, social workers, advisors, community advocates, community connections, people who are former students, creatives, working together to build solid, strong relationships with high school students to learn who they are and their stories and what they're up to and challenges they might have, and then provide opportunities for them to start to work on some of their issues, some of their challenges, some of their brilliant ideas, and a lot more freedom and space for them to do it within. So at our school, we really start with relationship building with an advisor, connecting with a student and their family, getting to know them, figuring out what they want school to be, figuring out what their strengths are, what they see as needs of areas of growth. And then we adapt our system, our school system, our pedagogical framework, our construction of our school day to match the needs of the students. And what that looks like is it is not bell to bell to bell to bell, an organized system that benefits the adults in the room and the cohesive structure of analytical planning, but instead it's a little bit more free flowing. Students can practice freedom. Students have the power to make choices. They can choose their own goals. They can choose what their day looks like. They can choose how they want to showcase their learning in different spaces. And sometimes it means they need to put therapy, artistic creation, kinesthetic movement, physical activity, even just talking and chilling out at the front end of their day or their year before they jump and they're thrown into math class, right? oftentimes young people need to do things that help them reorient themselves on a life plan to be successful in education that are not allowed in that traditional schoolhouse. There's no time and space. And at our school, we say there needs to be, and that time and space that the young people ask for and the way that they want it has to come first. Now, what that looks like in practice is a 3-hour long conversation. So I'm going to pause it there. But I think that kind of starts to answer your question. We have remixed the concept of what a school is. We see ourselves as much more than a school, almost in a broad strokes community center where we have a lot of different professionals and spaces and opportunities for young people to learn in different ways. And I'll pass to my colleagues here to add to that.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thanks, Joey. And I like how you talked about remix. And I would just add the community learning center is really the model that we incorporate in terms of what we do. But I'd like to meet Chris' question, just take it to a higher level, because I love the prompt around revolution. I think in order to do this work within the public education sector, you have to be in a mindset of being a revolutionary, because the status quo is literally doing violence to so many young people in this country every single day. I remember when George Floyd's murder happened, and it was, the efforts to defund the police, and that has a lot of there's a lot of great basis for that. But as I was thinking about that, I was thinking way more focused on why are we talking about defunding public education, because of the violence and harm that it's doing to so many of our young people to start with. I mean, far, far more young people's lives are literally not just marginalized, but cut short, literally live less than other people because they don't have the opportunity to achieve a high school diploma, or they're just incredibly underprepared for the world, and then have to make choices that literally lessens their life expectancy. So, however you might feel about the funding the police, and I can see both sides of it to a certain extent, because you have some vulnerable communities and there's issues there. But public education to me is something that if you're in the midst of it, you have to be in a constant state of resistance to the status quo. You have to be mindful of where all of those points are, some of them obvious, some of them less obvious, that pushes you back towards the status quo, even when you think you're resisting at a point to make some impact. So, for us, one of the things that we use that really gave us our birth is how hip hop as a culture came into existence. Hip hop came into existence because, again, I'm from New York. Back in the 70s, when the New York, city's budget was in disarray, and arts and everything was being taken out of the schools, young people were left, just to themselves. What they did as an act of their own revolution of bringing their voice to power is that they created this incredible culture, and they show what they were capable of doing and demonstrating their genius in terms of showing their hustle and resiliency and creative currency. And they gave us the blueprint to how best to engage with them. And to this day, we still ignore that. So for us, it's about, why are they ignoring it? In my belief, they're ignoring it is because these young people should, demonstrated their power, their voice, their force of will that changes the dynamic from being adult-centered, like Joey's talking about, into youth-centered. So what we do is that we elevate that voice. We support that voice. We start at that point. We want that genius to be nurtured and to be given fertile ground so that it could blossom into something that enables them to become, conscious, aware, able to know how to access information, learning how to collaborate, learning how to use technology in the best interest of themselves and their community, and learning how to resist, learning how to see the forces around them that have led to their communities oftentimes being neglected, to not just being bystanders to it, but to know how to actively confront it and to change it. So, I gave a keynote speech recently, and where I talked about that these were revolutionary times as educators. And I was using what happened with George Floyd as a backdrop to that. And also recently, I used Biggie Small's 10 Crack Commandments and kind of riffed on that and created the 10 Equity Commandments. And, within that is really just talking about, what we need to do actively to resist, because these are revolutionary times, and we need to, as public educators, understand that's where we are, and that's the work we need to do and be committed towards.
Melissa and Keith, I want to get you in the mix here. Let's go.
Sure. Yeah. No, I appreciate the question. For me, in my personal experience, becoming a revolutionary in education was a process. I started out back in 2002 as a first-year teacher in a very traditional mindset of education, and I was real good at it. And so when I came back into the educational sphere 10 years later in 2013, those methods were not working with the students that were in front of me, and I had to find something that worked. And I discovered something called project-based learning, and it immediately worked with kids. I immediately saw that their engagement and their, that fire in their eye, where that you're reaching them. And so I knew I had to find out more about this. And for me, it was a journey. I think if you're going to lead a revolution in education, you have to first have experiences yourself so that you can revolutionize your mind and know what you're trying to do. Because I think a lot of people see things on the outside, but until you really get down on the inside and understand the culture, the foundational aspects that make something revolutionary, it's hard to replicate that and spread it. And so for me, I spent a year out at a very well-known project-based learning network in California. And that's actually where I met you, Tony, through that. And, for me, it was a process of discovering and dismantling this invisible matrix in my head that I didn't even know was there. And I would be going about my day in a school, and something would happen that would jar against this scaffold in my head that I didn't know was there. It was this underlying belief system about what education was. And something would happen that would be different at this school, and it would reveal a piece of a matrix in my head, this underlying the way things should be. And so because it was revealed to me, I could slowly over time dismantle this matrix and rebuild a matrix inside of me of what education should be and could be. And I think that was the beginning of my foundation as a revolutionary educator, is that I had to first build up kind of a vision, a passion for what I wanted to create. And the second thing for me was being in the mix with people who had that same framework. You can't do this alone. Out here in Denver, I feel very alone sometimes, but I have people that I call all the time that I can reach out to for support, who are like-minded, where you don't have to spend an hour explaining yourself. You can just go right to the question and the issue. And for us at 5280, the equity piece was a non-negotiable for me. So there was no option but to be a public school. And in Denver, we had the opportunity to be a charter school. So the charter school label gives us a little bit of the autonomy we need to do what we need to do, but it also allows us to be free and accessible to all. And when you're dealing with mental health issues, substance use, there is a lot of inequity in that field. And I was not going to be the next thing that was going to be accessible only to those with money. And so we're a public school, we're accessible to all, and ensuring that the resources that we provide and the hope that we provide our families is open to everybody in the city of Denver and beyond. That's so foundational to me that was one of our founding principles. So we opened up as a public school here in Denver, and it's been wonderful. I think another thing is I see some well-intentioned educators who want to be revolutionary, but they're not truly tackling a problem that's tangible. They have a great idea, but it's not meeting a need in the community, even though it's an awesome idea. And I think that HSRA obviously meets a need, and we meet a need too. And so here in Denver, we enjoy a very unique relationship with our district and with our community. And we avoid a lot of the political fighting of charter versus traditional versus innovative versus we avoid all that because everybody knows somebody who struggles with addiction and they don't know what to do, right? And so everybody kind of believes in our mission, and that unique vision helps us promote our revolution. It gives us a little bit more freedom from the system because we are meeting a need that everybody across the board can understand, like, oh, we need to do something about this. We don't know what to do, but 5280 is going to do something. And so that gives us a little bit of freedom. We've got parents who are so desperate to get help for their kid that they're moving in from out of state because they've got nothing in their state, and they're moving to Denver to enroll at 5280 just because they're scared about their kid dying and overdosing. And so when you're really meeting an innovative need, I think you get a little bit more license to be revolutionary, and people they give you a little bit more grace and a chance to get started. And so those are just some of the thoughts I had. Keith, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say, if you want to be a revolutionary educator, you got to allow your students to be revolutionary as well. And you got to allow them the opportunity to be their authentic selves. Allow them to show up to school how they want to show up to school, and be willing to meet them wherever they're at. And to be revolutionary, you got to exhibit some principles too, right? Like, you got to have courage. You got to have courage under fire, because there's going to be times in this journey where you're going to be like, "Ooh, is this going to work out, right? Is this going to work out?" You got to have a lot of faith, and you got to be willing to see this thing all the way through. And we never said it was going to be easy. We only said it was going to be worth it. And it's been worth it. It's been worth it. It's been worth it to see these kids' light bulb come on, to see these kids grow, to see these kids do things they never thought was possible. And for our end, to see kids stay clean and sober one day at a time, as well as excel in the classroom and excel in their personal life, excel at a job. And that's the blessing. That's the blessing. And we don't create the miracle. We just get an opportunity to be a part of it. And that's what makes it awesome. But you got to be willing. You got to be willing to be willing to be willing to be willing, especially when things get tough. You got to continue to have the faith that everything is going to work out. And thus far it has. And you just got to keep the faith and allow the students to be who they are. And that'll really allow them the opportunity to grow.
Let me continue with the push here. I love everything you're saying, but here's where I want to go with this. See how you guys want to respond, right? So, I teach in the Doctor of Education program in Northeastern, and I happen to be networked with a lot of schools, not unlike your own. There are revolutionaries all over the United States doing revolutionary work. Although we don't have an ecosystem where it's not like the movie opening on Friday night. Everybody knows it's opening. There's not a place to go. Oh, there's this really cool revolutionary school just 10 miles down the road. Nobody would know, right? What do you mean there's a high school for recording arts? What do you mean about these schools in Denver? Nobody, but when people do find out about these places, they also say, wow, that's really cool. These people are superhumans. They're like Superman, Superwoman, or whatever you want to say. They were born with a cape on their back. They're able to do this revolutionary work, but I cannot. And I want to front the revolution saying, no, anybody can insert themselves if they can rumble up the courage. And to your point, Melissa, find other people, other revolutionaries to get inspiration from, and then also get some insights in, like, how can you be a revolutionary in this ecosystem? What needs to happen? What should they do? What can they do? How can they not think of themselves as, I don't have the power to be revolutionary? What would you say to these folks?
Yeah, no, I think I mean, we all have that doubt. We all have that doubt. One of my favorite quotes, and I don't know who said it, but somebody said it: everything you've ever wanted is on the other side of fear. And that is so true. I think so many people live their lives in mediocrity because they're too scared to step out of their comfort zone, or they have so many doubts. And I truly believe that anybody can be a revolutionary. I mean, it's like teaching, having high school kids is actually the greatest way to assure yourself of that certainty, because every high school student has some sort of genius and brilliance in them. It differs from kid to kid, but there are flashes of brilliance in high school kids that most people in this world can't see. And if you see that every day, then just know that that was you. 10 years ago when you were in high school, 20 years ago, that was you. And everybody has the capacity to do something great if they will put aside their fear. For me, I have kind of like a 3-step process, or it feels like 3 tiers. The first tier is when you come up against challenges, you got to fake it till you make it. I have this music, what's it called? A playlist on my phone that's called Fuck the Haters. I don't know if that needs to be edited, but it's what I play when something happens and I'm feeling doubt or fear, or I'm upset about something. I play that playlist, and that's how I fake it till I make it. Sometimes you just have to pump yourself up and fake it till you make it. And then for me, if it gets a little harder, that's when I call my people on the phone. I've got to have a close, tight-knit group, and I don't call the same person for every problem, but I have to have people in my corner that I can reach out to for real advice on a real issue that I'm having. And then every once in a while, I get to what I call my 3rd level of fear, which is I'm literally done and I've got no answers. I've got nobody to call. I can't fake it anymore. And that's when I just have to give it up to the universe, give it up to God, and try to do some self-care. I sleep, I meditate, I pray, I do what I need to do to be in community with people, and I just do self-care. And every single time in the last 5 years, it's happened. Every wall that we were up against that I thought this is the end of the journey, it's been broken down. And so that's kind of my 3-tier. And I've defined 3 tiers because I've gone through so many up and downs over the last 5 years that it just has become a part of how I process. Like, is this a tier 1 problem where I just need to put my playlist on, or is this a tier 2 problem where I need to call somebody? So as you get through this journey, you will sophisticate more on your capacity to handle fear, but it's always going to be there. And the most important thing is just that people start. You just start. I mean, I just started. And the moment I decided to quit medicine and launch 5280, I was in a group of about 20 of my closest friends. And every summer we do a retreat in Vail, Colorado. And we connect for the summer, for like a weekend. And it was like our 4th or 5th time connecting. And so it's a really safe place where we talk about our hopes and dreams. We talk about our barriers. We update each other around the year, and it's a way for us to connect. And the safety of that community was what finally allowed me to leap off the cliff and say, okay, I'm going to commit to this. It's been in my head for 18 months. It's just crazy to quit medicine. It's a good job. It's a great career. It's awesome. But I just felt the push. And because of that community, I leapt off, and here we are 5 years later. So I don't know. Does that help? Does that address some of your questions?
Yeah. I bet Joey or Tony want to jump in there.
Sure. Tony, you want to go first?
Yeah, I just want to say I really love what Melissa shared. I think it was just spot on. I love her 3 steps, and all of that's so important. Just really short. I reflect on what I think is one of the great revolutions in humankind history and the civil rights movement, and how so many people were able to contribute to it in so many different ways. And, we hear the story about, the people who were just in the audience in those churches, doing the little tasks, contributing in small ways. But when you hear from the known leaders, and they talk about, what they were accomplished and the accolades they've been given, they reflect back on the people whose names we don't know, and the way that they made what was able to be accomplished possible. And, for me as a leader, I try to create the space where people are able to come in, like Keith said, authentically themselves and with fear and with all of those things, and value them as highly as anyone else in terms of their contribution, and have them see that we're really all a part of a collective, and each part is critical in us being able to achieve what we're achieving. So there's no sense of hierarchy in terms of contribution, because I know absolutely I couldn't do the things I do without every single part of the effort and the movement that we're engaged in. I believe in that. One of our mentors is Dr. Wayne Jennings. I'm not sure if you know him, Chris, but he started the St. Paul Open School in Minnesota, and he talks about transformation of schools. And one of the things he talks about is that you only achieve transformation with comprehensive school change. Literally everything matters. And if everything matters, you as a leader, you're just one small part of that, because it's everything. And again, the forces that can pull you back to the status quo could be in places you would never think of. And there may be one person whose name nobody knows who helps to maintain the integrity of what you're trying to accomplish. So that's the perspective that I come to this with.
Yeah, to add to that a little bit, I think that there are a lot of structures out in the educational landscape that are been around a long time, and whether they were intentionally set up this way or that they've become this, they entrench the status quo, and they are set up to disempower actors and radical voices and radical thinkers within those spaces. So it does take courage to do radical school transformation. I do think that there needs to be a discussion around changing spaces. I think, as Melissa, you said, the charter school movement allowed spaces for programs like yours and ours to innovate and be lab schools and communicate and make innovations in our communities to serve a particular need or purpose. And they've been enormously successful because they've identified equity gaps and programmatic problems of some of the institutions that have existed there. But some of those things haven't returned back into the broader public school enterprise or other political spaces as necessary change, and the pendulum keeps swinging back and forth. So I think there needs to be a dialogue about how we need to have comprehensive systemic change in a lot of the different spaces, starting on the very small level. But to something that Keith said, and Tony, you reiterated, the idea of creating spaces for students to show up authentically and empowering students and developing strong, robust relationships can happen anywhere where people are willing to push for it and create power sharing structures that allow youth the opportunity to do those things. And you have to sometimes throw things out to create the space to do those things. There are all these things that are dragging teachers and administrators into a mindset that say, I don't have time to do that because I have to fulfill these curriculum standards, because I have to do MCA testings in the spring, because I have to do X, Y, and Z. So I don't have time to do that. But fundamentally, as a schoolhouse, building authentic, very rich relationships and giving students power in our spaces is transformative and starts to create the seed for broader change in any institution. So I think anyone who's listening to this and saying, okay, I work in the public school, I don't have a relationship with my principal, I can't really do anything, or my school just isn't set up like your guys' school is, we don't have that equipment, or we didn't have that mission. That's an easy way to then just give up. But you can't, because the young people who show up every day are criminalized by that neglect. That's systemic. You can't give up on that. Like Tony was saying, you have to say, what power do I have to make change now? Because that young person who walks in today, that moment with them is an imperative moment. It's an extremely important moment that you have with them. And the structure that you create for them to interact with the school matters to their life and matters to their trajectory. We need to give them space to show their brilliance and to deal with problems that they have. And so I think that every educator, in whatever role you have in whatever space, needs to think about some foundational ethical norms and values that they want to bring to those space, and start to question, what are the things in my school, what are the things in my structures that I'm building or supplanting that deviate from that? If there's things that in the way that I've set up my classroom that don't allow me to get to know my students and don't give them a place to express themselves, be an individual, showcase who they are authentically, I need to start to dismantle those things, because that has to come first, you know, and the opportunity for students to express their creativity and have an authentic expression of their learning in a way that is culturally relevant to them and how they want to express themselves, that has to come first too. And if you don't have a space for students to do those things, those are some innovations that you could change on any level. And you have to, because it's life or death. We spent some time with an organization in Minnesota called the Violence Project that works to study how to prevent school shootings. And they said over and over and over again, the profile of a school shooter is pretty consistent in the sense that you have an alienated young person that just wasn't reached and didn't have a solid connection with a program, a community member, a family member, anybody. And they felt that it got to the point where they just couldn't take it anymore. A small act of kindness, building a relationship, developing a rapport, giving a young person an opportunity to get help or express themselves. Those things save lives. They save a young person in a trajectory that could have gone another way. That has to be the mission of every schoolhouse in America, and everyone can start there. That's what I think.
Well, I know we got to wrap up here because of time and so forth. I do want to make a comment and hand it off to Jim to wrap us up. Following what Melissa said, I get so much, my energy stays true towards this revolution, I guess. I guess I could put it that way, because I am connected and networked with all these friends and colleagues and fellow revolutionaries. If I can include you in the mix now, right? And you get in, because you're in the system, and sometimes the system and the ecosystem you're in, you recognize is poisonous and doing gross disservice and harm to our youth. I'm reminded, I don't know if you guys knew this, I'm not sure I got it right there. I do think this is a civil rights movement. I think this is a significant social justice and civil rights movement. Not unlike, which is not to say that we're still not in the middle of the our particular civil rights activities emanating from the late 50s and so forth. But I'm reminded of, I don't know if people knew of the Highlander Center in Tennessee in the late 50s, Miles Horton and others, in the late 50s, early 60s. Those who were involved in the civil rights movement in the South in the late 50s, 60s, they would come together at this location at the Highlander Center and share strategies, connect and reconnect. Or Melissa said she went off on a retreat with her friends. I think that we need to figure out how to activate this as a civil rights movement around and for our youth. That we're not gonna create better communities and contribute to our humanity and make them better and more just and humane world unless we change how we embrace our youth and support their own actualization and unleash their own creativity to create a more humane world. And if we keep them in the factories that we have right now, we're going to continue with the status quo as we have it, which I know is not serving the greater good. So I would just want to venture that if anybody wants to get onto the revolution, and just email me or call me or Jim or find these people who are revolutionaries and connect with them. connect with them and start building relationships, and then say, okay, I don't know exactly what to do, and then, we'll help you think about it. That's what I think. Anyway, Jim, you want to take it from there?
Thanks for summarizing that for us, Chris. I'm so appreciative of those that are in conversation with us during this past hour. I'm mindful of where we started. A lot of what was talked about was not recognizing early on in your stage of life that you were going to get into education. There was this circuitous route that you took, but you found yourself here and you truly feel empowered. And I'm hearing from each of you that we're not talking about school, we're talking about lifelong education. And that's reflected in Tony's experience with education. And Melissa, your experience. Keith, you talk about the non-cognitive skills that really empower students to feel belonging. And Joey, you're talking about building a community. When we think about teachers growing up, maybe we didn't have that in mind, but we're here doing it today. And so I'm really appreciative of you all being here. And just like Chris mentioned now, we're all revolutionaries, and there is no reason why those that are listening, those that are watching, those that are taking in this content, feel free to reach out. We're all in this together, and we have a means by which we can support students and having them feel empowered. So I am greatly appreciative of your contribution to this conversation today. I wish we had more time. Maybe there will be a part 2 further down the road. We'll get in some more friends in this revolution, but thank you to everyone that listened to watching this content. We are truly grateful and look for our next episode on a revolution in education.